Okay, well, I think we can get underway. Welcome to the panel entitled Writing in English as a Foreign Language. We have with us four authors, one French, one Quebecois, and two Italian, if I got that correctly. Yes?
Exactly.
Good. Who are all writing in English in one form or another. I be a moderator. I'm neither a writer nor am I in any way greatly creative, so I'll sit on the side.
Well.
I am foreign though, yes, I am from Luxembourg, so my first languages are Luxembourgish, French and German. So I've read science fiction in many different languages and just been forced to consume some in Polish as well. It's going very slow. It's going very slow. But I'll let our panelists introduce themselves. So why don't we start with Anna?
I'm Anna, and I am so foreign that I've taken pity on the British and I don't force them to spell my surname anymore. And I have been a translator from English to Italian for 20 years. And a writer in Italian, and then I started writing in English because the Italian literary market basically does not exist anymore. So I was kind of forced to switch to English, and I write in English. I publish something very small things.
My name is Roberto. I speak Italian, speak the German, I speak English with Italian accent. So now you are sure that I am
You are
not
so
English.
putting it on.
No, you are sure that I am not English because she speaks very, very good English. Okay, jokes apart, I usually write in Italian. I've written actually one book together with Ian Watson in English, so now this makes me entitled to participate to this plan.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm Claude Lumière. I'm a Quebecois, but even though I was born in a francophone family and educated in French, actually it's a little bit of a cheat that I'm here because my inner language is English, and I write entirely in English. I don't ever write in French. And I'm the author of a story collection called Objects of Worship, which is out now. And thank you so much. So anyway, that's why I'm here. I'm
Aliette, and well, French is my first language, and I started writing in English after moving to London when I was a teenager and reading science fiction and fantasy in English. So when I actually decided to write science fiction, I thought I would just do it in the language I'd been reading it in, which turned out to be English. And I continue that even after going back to France. So I have this very weird relationship with the English language, which is that most of my daily life is in French and the writing part is in English. And I've had a few stories published in professional markets, and my first novel is out now. So
Buy it.
yeah.
Yes, mention the name.
I think
of
she
as
bought it
well.
already.
I think I get free copies actually. I think that's the prerogative of being an author.
And what's the title of your novel?
My novel is called Servant of the Underworld. It's a nasty fantasy.
Okay, good. We've already started talking about the choices you made or why you became an English language writer. Claude, was there any particular point beyond your inner language being English that you...
Well, you see, there was a point in my life where I guess I transitioned more and more toward English, and I think the change was entirely done by the time I was 23, I'd say. In my late teens and early 20s, I did write a little bit in French, but that didn't stick, just as French didn't really stick. I'm actually a little rusty in French. My French is kind of so-so. I couldn't really write all that well in French. And the language of my imagination, the language of my dreams is entirely French. It would actually make, in some ways, more financial sense for me to write in French, because in Quebec, where I'm fairly well known, I would be a big fish in a small pond. And whereas when I write in English, I'm writing in a gigantic ocean, so but yeah, so and when I decided to get back to writing, by that time I've been entirely, my whole life has been in English, my whole adult life, and like Aliette, I mostly read in English, so it felt natural to go to English once I started to write more seriously.
The strange thing is I've only lived in an Anglophone country for the past 4 years. Well into my 20s, well into my 40s, I lived in Italy, in a completely Italian speaking world. So much so that my parents can't actually speak English. They can't read the stuff I write. And for a long time, well, I had to write in Italian because I was a translator, so you know, my job was to express science fiction in Italian, which is really, really hard, but you know, I was paid to do it. And for a long time I wrote science fiction in Italian, and I found it incredibly hard. And when I finally decided to switch to English, it was with an incredible sense of relief. Mostly because there is next to nothing Italian science fiction. And so whatever I read was a translation from English, and it was very difficult as this bottleneck. So when I was 13, I started going to England to study. First I walked into a W.H. Smith library, when they still had lots of books, and I walked upstairs, and they had this wall full of science fiction. I said, my God, I'm in paradise now. And you know, whenever I went back to England, I would fill up my suitcase with books and read them. And basically for me, science fiction was in English. And I tried desperately to force it into this, you know, this round hole, square peg, round hole that was Italian, because I wanted to contribute to, you know, creating an Italian science fiction. And I thought the only way it could flourish was if it was open to influences from the outside. And open in a different way than simply accepting passively what, you know, what people could read in translation, but people actually read the original stuff that was going on abroad. The problem was that I wrote and I sent stuff off, and I wasn't very successful. And when I started reading in English, writing in English, I sent my stories to Clarion West, just in the off chance, and I was accepted, which was like winning the lottery. And when I got there, it was like, suddenly I was this very, very good writer, which nobody had told me when I was and I came back, and I had a bit of a cultural shock coming back to my own country, realizing that I really didn't belong there. And it's a strange thing, it's a very sad thing when you realize that, you know, the place you were born and you belong to is actually alien to you. And so sadly I had to leave everything behind and come here.
I did the same, but I went to Romania, so I went. So my English became worse and worse, because once upon a time I could speak reasonably well English, but then I went to Romania, where everybody was speaking a basic English, at least when I went there, so that nobody would understand me if I would speak correctly. So I had to introduce mistakes inside the talks, even orthographic mistakes while speaking, something very difficult to do. And this way my English has become worse and worse. Actually, I think I'm the most handicapped person here, because I'm among cheaters. I mean, he switched to English when he was 23. At that time I was just only using drugs and so I couldn't switch to English because...
So some things, you know, linguistic barriers are great in some ways, and sometimes they disappear. I met him at the 1990 convention in Den Haag, where he didn't know pretty much any English.
Oh, no, really?
And was extremely proficient in romancing various Dutch and German and English girls that happened by. He was going strong.
This was the kind of drugs I was referring to.
You spoke an international language.
Yeah, actually, Yeah, this was a very good time. Yes. Apart from that, so he has switched a long time ago. She writes always in English, as far as I understood. You definitely moved here. So I'm the only one who actually went in the wrong place to write English, which is Romania. On the other side, I'm on this pen because I wrote an entire book with Ian Watson. And actually it was on English because
It's called The Beloved of My Beloved.
The Beloved of My Beloved, yes. It contains a lot of stories.
One up for the BSFA.
Oh yeah, really, I forgot about that. Yeah, actually it's the first time in the history of the BSFA where you will be granted the right to vote actually for a non-English writer for the British Pride. Yeah, so actually. If somebody wants to read it, you may go to my fellow writer Ian Watson and ask him for a copy of the story, so that you don't have to vote something that you didn't read, which would be very immoral. So I like immoral people, by the way. So back to serious things, if they exist. It has been quite difficult in the beginning to write a book in a different language, especially as well. I started with the punctuation. I think that this was very easy. You know, I realized that most of the punctuation is actually the same.
Not all.
Yeah, not all actually. There are the first mistakes appeared already with the punctuation. Actually, I started, sincerely speaking, writing in Italian, then I would translate my work into English, and then submit my part to Ian, which would metabolize it, and so on. But starting from the middle of the book, let's say, I started to write directly on English, and to my surprise, it was flowing better than through this trick of translation, because actually it seems that part of, I'm starting to grow a little Robert inside with an English writer. And
Robert.
Oh, sorry?
Robert.
Robert, Robert, actually, yeah, actually, my email address is bobpali@gmail.com. Yeah, so
You're already transitioned.
Yeah. And so actually, there is an advantage in writing in a language which is not your first, that you're forced to be more simple. And actually, this may seem a disadvantage at first, but actually, it's an interesting challenge, you know, because you have still to be intelligent, because else it's just write trash. But yeah.
I think this is something that happens to us Italian when you write in English, because it happens often that when I write in English, people say, you know, this sentence has gone on for half a page. Put a period in, for God's sake. And in Italian, that is a perfectly acceptable way to construct a phrase.
Yeah, I know.
And so you have to learn to break up the periods, because
In English, that's called Thomas Pynchon.
yes.
Yes, a lot of translators has cursed me for that, because in Italian my sentences are very long, which is fully allowed in Italian, but in English it isn't really. Yeah.
Well, it's not that it's not allowed, but it's just not the current style.
Not the current style.
Yeah.
You can get away with some of it, but
Yeah,
not
yeah.
Well, I don't write the current stories anyway.
Yeah.
ahead of your time.
Yeah. So I think we're up to Aliette, who hasn't really weighed in on your question.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's the question again?
Choose one.
Just go with the flow. I think it was mainly about the process of your English writing. I mean, seeing as your environment is mainly French speaking, how do you go about bringing this English creativity into play?
Well, mostly it's a kind of a partition thing. It's like I read mostly everything in English, that not only the science fiction, but also anything to do with the research. For instance, all my research books in English, because I tried actually in the beginning having research books in French, and I would just have to translate everything from French into English, and it was really a hassle. So I thought that was just simpler to actually create a sort of little fictional bubble where I would isolate myself and sort of mentally get into the English mode. Because the thing I find very hard is like switching between languages takes a lot of effort. When I'm listening, for instance, for French, I'm not able to process English and vice versa. So I have to be in a particular state of mind. And when I went to Montreal for the Worldcon, I was really, really exhausted by the end of the day because I was
You have to
constantly,
switch
yeah,
constantly.
I was constantly switching, and it's just you become when you become bilingual, you just lose the link between both languages. Is what happened to me. Is like if you ask me to translate something for you, I will go something like that. Okay, this means really in pictures. This. How would I express this picture into English? Probably with that word. I mean, I have to think about it. It's not like instant. I've kind of cut the bridges because when I'm talking to you now, I'm thinking in English. I'm not going through French anymore. So I have to be in that mindset where I'm thinking in English, I'm writing my sentences in English, and it all comes naturally. So I have to, well, first I have to make sure nobody interrupts me because otherwise it's just going to kill somebody. And second, yeah, every little reference, everything that I need to track down has to be in English. That way I can just copy straight onto the page and not have to worry about the whole language switch.
I'd like to follow up on something that Anna said, and then something that Aliette said. I think I'll segue directly from what Aliette said. Is that this like I've always spoken both languages. So and as a result, it's true. Like I don't translate easily orally. Like I can translate on paper quite easily, but when I'm speaking, it's either French me or English me, and there's, and to switch is actually a very difficult physical process.
Yes.
And I'm actually
Yes.
not quite the same person in both languages. It's close, but not really. And part of the reason I think why I've gone more toward English is that, and this will segue to what you were saying earlier, is that I much prefer Englishmen to Frenchmen. I like that person more, and a big part of that is that I do feel a little bit like an alien in my home, my own land. I don't really feel that much at home in Quebec. I feel a little more at home in Montreal, which is my hometown, and the rest of the province. I certainly do not feel at home anywhere else. But I feel more at home in Toronto, and I feel even more at home in London. So there's a part of me that is really that feels a strong kinship toward English,
Yeah.
and I don't feel that kinship with with my native land.
It's
so to
probably
speak.
London, and I was thinking if I lived in deepest Hertfordshire, I probably wouldn't feel so at home.
No,
Because
no.
London has this thing that
I'm a
everybody's
cosmopolitan
Italian.
type of person, right? Yeah, right.
But I completely endorse his psychic point of view, because actually I'm feeling my ultimate ambition is to feel alien inside my own mind.
Right.
To this extent, actually, I'm recently learning Russian, but in English language. So I'm an English-Russian speaker. This means that I can speak Russian, but only if I previously translated in my mind from English. On the other side, I don't translate from Italian to English in my mind. So actually, I become the English self, who speaks Russian.
You're right.
This becomes a trouble if I'm with Italians and Russians together, because then the English is absent. So I cannot speak Russian anymore because the English guy is in limbo.
There was before I learned when I was in Italy and I got somewhat drunk, I tended to speak in English. And if I was drunker still, Spanish came out. And I had some Spanish because it's very close to the Italian. I used to listen to music. If I got drunker still, the German came out. And the interesting fact is I had never studied German.
But I have
What were
studied
you
German,
drinking
so
though?
probably there must be some. Probably you were
At
stuck
that
in
point
German.
I
Was it,
had-
was it German beer or?
At that
Yeah.
point, I have no
Alright,
memory.
no
of
recollection.
French. But the interesting thing was that I bought this badge, I think at The Hague, that said, "Please tell me when I'm not speaking English," which is must the same phenomenon, because and it happens when I'm with Italians and English people that I culturally speak Italian to the English people, and then English to the Italian people, and we both looking at that. Are you playing dumb or something? And
The really intriguing thing is when different people with split personality like ours meet and start to speak a language, and then they switch to another language, because this means other two persons are
Yes.
actually interacting, you know.
Yeah.
So two of them can be very friendly to each other, while other hates. Two can also have a physical attraction to each other, while other absolutely not, you know. And then there are all the cross possibilities. You know? So,
Quantum linguistics.
yeah.
there's this right now the people I can best communicate with are other Italian expatriates, because they
That's really
speak in
true.
English, but when I need an Italian concept, they wouldn't understand it, and nobody else can do that. So
Moreover, Italian experts have a beautiful feature, you know, that are experts. So actually, we have something very much in common.
Yes.
We couldn't stand Italy anymore
Yes.
for some reason. Actually, all the best Italians I've known in the past 10 years, I've known them outside of Italy. And there, it's very good to go outside Italy to knowing Italian. Actually, I would recommend it to each of you, especially beautiful women, you know.
But what Anna was saying about concepts is very central to all this, because language is the matrix in which you view reality. Like the way our memories work, we don't remember anything. We remember the way we narrate what happens to ourselves, and that's why we can't trust our memory at all. Because as we tell ourselves the story of our lives, it keeps changing a little bit, you know. So, but it is a matrix, and you narrate your own life to yourself in a language, and when you come, like in my case, to narrate your life in a language other than in your native tongue, that becomes the language that you express life in. So that's why it's very difficult for me to write in French, because it is not my inner voice. It's not the way that life is narrated, automatically now, you know. And each language comes with its own set of concepts that are not equivalent. They're close sometimes, or words will have connotations in one language that color that word or that concept in a way that will be colored a little differently in the other language. So anyway.
More than little different.
Yeah.
Actually, I noticed personally myself, on English I noticed I got sometimes even much better ideas than on Italian, which is, I found it outrageous, you know, because I've written all my life on Italian, and then suddenly on English I noticed sometimes ideas were coming and I could recognize that for some reason they were better than the one that I would have had if I had written that in Italian. And
Because
regarding
the associations are not the same.
it's
Yeah.
another person,
Yeah.
it's another language, and the language produces the meaning. I mean, the words producing the meaning
Yeah.
that then you think, and one thing follow the other.
Yeah.
And for the same reason, actually, you know, we speak about that we cannot trust our memories, you know.
No.
You remember that yesterday you promised me 1,000. I remember that. I'm sure you do.
The sad thing is that at one point I remember that I started writing my diary in English, and it wasn't because I wanted to hide things from my parents. It was just because my inner self was expressing itself in English, and you know when they talk about cultural appropriation and cultural imperialism, I'm totally, you know, I'm so much of a tool of the imperialist language as you can possibly have, a total betrayer of my culture. I find it very sad, actually, and I think it happened because, curiously, science fiction has this very, very Anglophone feel to it. And you know, Italians can be accused of not being good at literature, and yet we have produced pretty good thrillers and mysteries, but science fiction is really, really thin on the ground, very bad when there is, and I don't know why. There might be something.
I was actually going to mention that. Yes, question.
Don't you bring your own Italian or Quebecan or French concepts with you to the story. Even if you're thinking English and you're an English persona, there's still something in the background which is really Italian or French or whatever.
I don't think so.
No?
I don't know, but I don't think so.
I think so. Well, I would disagree with that. I
Well-
think to some extent, everything that you're writing is the sum of what you've been perceiving, and the sort of, there are concepts that are embedded very, very, very deep down that have been hammered into you when you were children that just won't go away.
I think that what I have is an outsider's perspective. That I very much recognize. I know that I am looking at this culture from the outside. Even though I am assimilated, I am very aware always that I am not a British citizen. I have probably done quite a bit of a conscious effort to leave my Italian self behind. That might extent, yes.
And in my case, I come from a bilingual city where both French and English coexist. So it's not quite the same. Like in Aliette's case, she lives like around Paris, so you know.
It's a little more complicated
Yeah,
than that,
but
yeah,
still, yeah, you know,
that's the-
yeah. And I just want to, again, to segue from something that Anna was saying, I appreciated that you introduced me as a Quebecois. Not a lot of people would make that distinction. But here lies a very important thing. For me, the language of oppression is not English, it's French. Because I'm a Quebecois, and my real language is something called Joual, which is a working class Quebecois French that is not recognized as a real language. So that as soon as I started to go to school in French, I was told that my way of speaking was wrong. Not the right, not the type of French you use in school, but no, it was wrong. Like out and out wrong, which is a concept that exists in French that does not so much exist in English, because English, the way all the dictionaries work is descriptive. Like the Oxford, the Webster, they send researchers out, and then they collect a dictionary that will describe how the language is being used at the time. In French, we have institutions that tell us how we should use the language, and even usage will barely put a dent into this. And so I have a language that is not oppressed by English; it is oppressed by French. And in English, I am freed from that whole dichotomy, which is really, really irritating. So that is very likely one big thing that drove me to English.
Yeah, I think I have that kind of similar
Yeah,
experience.
yeah.
Which is, French is very normative. It's
Very,
like that about 4 centuries ago, some guy called Cardinal de Richelieu came up with a great idea to occupy our writers. He said, okay, now you're going to be the gatekeepers for the
Yeah.
French language. Meanwhile, you will not be writing political satire. And, to this day, we have preserved the traditions. So they still pretty much edit the dictionary, and a lot of the French schooling is about getting the language right, getting the diction right, getting everything right and proper as it should be. And I think to some extent, when I'm writing in French, I feel as though all my French teachers are looking over my shoulder telling me, no, you will not write like that. You will not use that figure of speech. You will not put your commas there. This is incorrect.
Yeah, and that pressure is incredibly strong. And in English is so it's such an easy language to write in.
Yes.
It is, I mean, the grammar is very intuitive, and you have to internalize it. But what?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Italian vocabulary is about 150,000 words.
Right.
English at the latest count was 500,000.
Yeah.
And they're
I
still
think that's
adding.
an understatement, but yeah, because we coin new words every day in English, which is one of the wonderful things. And what's French is very averse to coinages. Like, they really don't like it when you coin a new word.
Don't mess around
Yeah,
with
yeah,
language.
no, 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 no.
Language is serious.
Yes, I know.
I think I coined some English words myself.
Yes,
you know.
I'm sure you have.
I forgot them in this moment, you know. So on the other side, I was very wise not to be oppressed by the French language by simply not learning this language.
Good
So,
idea.
On the other side, yeah, this helps very much. On the other side, I noticed I've been oppressed very much by entropy instead. In the sense that actually all these languages that now I have in my head conflict and fight for the supremacy of my attention. So that sometimes they mix. Today, even today, I was talking with my Italian fellows, some Romanian word happened in my mind and some English too. I was fighting them back into unconscious, but so actually it's a problem. On the other side, going back to what I said before, yes, the question about if we are influenced in our English writing by our Italian nature. I have a different problem. I have the problem, you know, that actually I'm also Romanian analphabet, because I speak fluently Romanian since I've been in Romania for years, but I never learned, so I'm completely analphabet. So I think I'm one of the first truly analphabet writers, I mean at least known to me. And this may seem just like a joke, but when you live years in the country, actually you cannot really properly write. And when you have to write simple letters to administration of your block to sell, I don't want to pay the money you ask me, you have to write like an analphabet full of mistakes or ask. But in this case, you know, I very much use the alternative identities of the Italian and English writer in order to tell, no, you're not an analphabet, you're a Romanian analphabet just only for hobby. I don't know if this makes a sense, but...
I was going to raise one point, which is, you've all mentioned that you've at one point or another walked into W.H. Smith and
Yes.
or had the English science fiction input. I was wondering how important that is, I mean, it goes hand in hand with your question. I was wondering how important the Englishness of science fiction and fantasy is to you when you decide to write and when you make creative decisions, when you write in English.
Hugely, but it meant that I could stop taking creative decisions. We just relax and go with what some other writers had discovered before me. Whereas in Italian, I really had to invent my language as I went along, and that was immensely difficult.
Well, for me, it's the point is I've read all the English science fiction in Italian, so this is actually the reason why I'm not a very good English writer. So I don't know very many words. So this didn't affect. On the other side, especially in the beginning of my Italian writing, I started to write like in the translations of.
Oh, yes.
So this is very bad. So I think that a lot of people were thinking I was a bad writer in Italy because I was writing like translators.
They told me that, yes.
Well, they didn't
told
told me, but they looked me very badly, and I understood they were thinking.
Right.
Well, for me, back when I was a child in Quebec, we had just come out of a long period of religious darkness that ended in the late 50s, early 60s, and there was no tradition of Quebecois reading. No one read. Like the only people in Quebec who read were the Anglophones. So in the 70s, when I went downtown, I discovered bookstores, and there were books, and I was so drawn to them. But on the French side, on the Quebecois side, now that's changed because now we're like half a century after the Quiet Revolution, which is what it's called, but when I was a child, there was no tradition of people having books in their home. There was no reading culture. So when I discovered books, it was in English. It was I was 10 years old or something, and I went downtown and I saw a bookshop, and I was like, oh my God, what is this? And so it's not just science fiction and fantasy for me, it's really just books. You know, so books to me are English.
For me, it's I guess a little more complicated than that. It's like learned writing in English, and I learned the science fiction genre, as it were, in English. And so a lot of what I'm writing is a dialogue with the writers of fantasy and science fiction that I've read. But on the other hand, up until I was 17 or 18, I didn't read anything in any other language than French. So there's a very fat layer of French books and to some extent Chinese and Japanese literature, because I'm half French, half Japanese. That's somewhere at the bottom, and that's really where I take the core of stuff. So I guess it's a bit of a mix.
First of all, my apologies. I missed the first 5 minutes, so if I'm asking something that has been answered, then my apologies. I was wondering about the process in which you have evolved as writers in a language that is not your own language. So how do you find that the process of you sitting down and writing something in English, how did it start and how did it change over time? So even technical stuff, such as, you know, did you find yourself using lots of synonym dictionaries in the beginning and less so now? Do you still feel in any way?
I'm lazy, so I never use the dictionary much. I have to say that being a translator, I had to look stuff up. Because when you're translating, you cannot just invent. It doesn't go down very well with the editor. So, for 20 years, I was looking stuff up in dictionary. And at the end of the 20 years, I wasn't doing it a lot because I had learned. But I have to say that I learned this very useful skill that foreign people who learn the foreign language use, which is understanding what words mean in context and acquiring them that way. When I was 14, I think, and I was in England, I bought this book by this new author, Jim Wolfe, that was called The Cologne, The Conciliator. I started reading it, and I loved it, and I, eat it up. And a lot of people find Wolfe really hard to read, because there are all these words that are not English. And for me, there were words I didn't know, like there were many words I didn't know, so it made a difference. I could interpolate the meaning. And that is actually the way people, babies, learn their vocabularies. So the more you read, basically, the more your vocabulary expands. So it's not writing that does that, it's reading a lot.
As for me, my religion forbids me. It does not allow me to look into dictionaries. And so actually I use just the words that I know. This, in the beginning, this seems like a serious impediment, but actually, as I was starting to say before, I realized that actually the limits are an advantage, paradoxically, because the more limits you have, the more you are forced to find original way outs from the problem where you stuck yourself. So this is probably the reason why I got out with some ideas which I thought I would not have had if I had been writing in Italian. Because actually I got stuck in some problem, and the problem contained somehow an original solution. But if without the problem, I would not have even that solution. So actually, paradoxically, the more difficulties and problems you have, you dive into when you write, the more the more you're likely to get the idea, which takes you out and actually makes what you've written much richer.
Somebody told me that you wrote almost 90% and initiated 90% of the story which is on the BSFA ballot, which every member of the convention can vote for. Now this is interesting and a little bit humiliating to me, because I heard that your English collaborator for his other stories has never appeared upon this ballot for a very long time. But now you come, and with the story which you wrote the most of, absolutely in the complete book, you are immediately laureated.
The universe is a very mysterious place. And this underlines actually what we have been talking, that the more you dive into the shit, the more splendid it becomes, you're jumping out on the other side. So actually, I think that this must be the reason for this story to have ended up on the ballot, that you may vote.
There was something that China Mieville told us when he was one of our clarinet instructors, and he came on and he was very serious and he lectured us at length on how we had to get out of our comfort zones and how the best writers he knew were writers for whom English was a second language, because that forced them to, gave them that extra dimension. And I was, beaming and I said, yeah. And he looked at me and said, no, you don't qualify because your English is too good. And there is some truth in that.
Oh, right,
Nobody ever told me something like that.
No. Well, I don't know, because my inner life is entirely in English, so I don't think my process when I write is any different from like any other English writer. Yeah.
I still use a dictionary. Sometimes I have the word in French. Some embarrassing moments I have the word in Spanish. It's just, sometimes I'm just looking for the equivalent of a word that doesn't actually exist in English, and I have to actually go look for a roundabout way to express what I was wanting to say. And it sometimes can be really frustrating because there's a perfect word in French to say what I want to say, and except there's no earthly equivalent in English, so I have to come up with some awkward way that doesn't quite fit the problem. And what I use a lot, actually, more than I use the French-English dictionary, is the thesaurus, because often I will know approximately a word that fits, but not quite the real word I want. So that's kind of what I use often.
Could I suggest that English has too many words? And this means that English-speaking native writers ought to use the dictionary more often. I've noticed, for example, that a lot of words are used wrongly. There is the word careen, which people seem to think means to move irregularly and fast down a road, or he careened along the corridor. It does not mean that. It means to turn a boat over on its side so you can scrape the shit off the bottom. And I get this wrongly used by English native speakers all the time in stories that I edit. So rejoice in the smaller vocabularies of foreign languages, because in English we actually have a duty to use the dictionary repeatedly and often.
We have an unfair advantage as speakers of Romance languages, that all those Latinate words that are the mark of very educated posh people.
Yeah.
Are the ones that have more Latin
Right, but then again, that can be a trap because there are too many close cognates.
Yes.
Where when a word is adopted by another language over centuries or even decades, it doesn't mean the same thing anymore. For example, one thing I find really funny here in England, you have things called brasseries that are restaurants. Now, a brasserie means brewery. So it should be a bar, but no, it's a restaurant. So
France, though, it's a kind of bar that serves food.
Right. But here it's really a restaurant. But in Quebec, it has kept its original meaning, and a brasserie is a brewer. Like that's it, and that's exactly what that word means. But so words
Don't
evolve.
get me started on paninis, please.
No. But words change and evolve, and meanings shift, like careening, and just to further your thing, like this will underline the irony of my position. I'm a freelancer in my day job. I work in text-related stuff, and my biggest contract is I'm a copy editor for an English language university press, even though I don't even have a BA or any English education whatsoever. So.
BA is British Airways, of course.
What?
BA is British Airways, of course.
No.
Yeah, this is another problem, because English speaking people use all these acronyms, which are a kind of hidden secret language that nobody can decodify except of the Illuminati.
Yeah, so it's the problem of TLA.
Yeah.
What's the TLA? It's a
Three
disease.
three.
I thought it was a
lang-
neural disease.
I said TWA, which is 3 words acronym.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking I suppose that most of the audience here must be composed by strangers. This means non-Anglophone people who are thinking, should be interesting to write something on English one day. So I was suggesting that in the future everybody will be allowed to do it easily, probably with an evolution of Google Translation. Actually, I've recently sent some text which I didn't have the time to translate to Ian, and the Google Translation has provided some beautiful surreal mistakes. Like
To be honest,
home.
a lot of your stuff has always seemed like it
Yes,
came
we
out of
did it
paper
all with
fish.
Google Translation. So, like home calmness, or comes with, how was it exactly?
Oh yeah, this is supposed to be an organisation which preserves domestic peace. Instead, we had Tranquil Housewife as the...
This is the Google Translation, it was absolutely gorgeous. But in the future, I can foresee, I see that actually Google Translation will also provide special translation for science fiction writers, so that actually he will also fix the logic, which is very often flawed anyway, everybody who writes, and then start to correct your story until actually Google Translator will write the story. You just only put a cocktail of things, cyberspace, a little bit of steampunk, 30%, and a little bit of car chase, and then he will make a beautiful bestseller that you can buy.
Sometimes I think some books are written that way.
Right. We've got one question here.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, maybe expanding on this idea you give that you associate English to fiction or science fiction. Do you have the feeling that some stories or some subjects, maybe like be it technological or even like high fantasy, demands to be written in English because it's the language?
Historically,
Yeah.
it's not nothing intrinsic in the language. It's
Stanislaw Lem. We have one of the best writers ever in the history of science fiction, Stanislaw Lem. He was writing in Polish, so actually it's a
Poles are a
statistical.
different category of people. Joseph Conrad.
Well, I will say, just back to something that Aliette and I were talking about earlier, is that we now live in a very fast-changing world. And French is a very static language. And it's very hard to describe new concepts in French. And they struggle with that at like the Académie all the time. Like they have huge conniptions over it because they don't know how to deal with a changing world. But with English, we'll coin new words, and some stick, some don't, and it's only usage that will decide if a word sticks or not. And it's easier, or well, I find it easier to describe our fast-changing world in English than I would in French. Where you have to use such convoluted phrases to describe things that you use one word in English, but in French you have to use a whole sentence because they won't accept a new word. You know?
I think that's one of the reasons that why one of the few countries in which there is such a wide market for science fiction as in the Anglophone countries is Japan. Because Japan has no problem acquiring other foreign words. And, they just write it in Kanagawa and pronounce it as if it was a Japanese word. And they are they're not insecure about their identity, that they are afraid and they're closed to other concepts. They just swallow it and make it theirs, which is
Which is what English does.
well, that also English does that.
Yeah.
And, I think the problem with Italian is not so much linguistic; it's social and cultural. Italy recently has become a very socially backward country, very insular, very closed up. And I think that is why there's so little exchange of ideas and enclosure to the strange, the weird.
Though that said, Italy is one of like the countries where I've been translated, so I can. So it's.
I've also been translated in Italy. This seems it's a joke, but it's true, because actually one of the stories that we wrote with Ian, not the one that you may vote, but another one, has been actually translated into Italian. They asked me if I wanted to do the translation. I started to think about that, and I thought so much time that actually that they did it. Because actually I was not very inclined to translate into Italian. It was very bizarre for me. So it was very interesting to read the translation of one of my stories made by somebody else into my own language.
Well, I've had that experience too. I've had two of my stories that have been translated into French in Quebec.
Oh, we are colleagues.
We are colleagues. I mean, I did proof it because I know the language, but I didn't do the actual hard translation, like the hard work of the translation itself. And in fact, the editor did not trust me to do it anyway. So,
I've been
he takes
translated
it.
into French, but thankfully I don't read
Yeah,
French well enough
right,
to have
yeah.
read it. And anyway, they didn't send me a copy, so
Yeah.
bastards.
There you go. But it is surreal to see your own work translated into your native tongue, and you didn't have anything to do with it. You know. Yeah.
Did you get to read those translations before they were published?
Well, yes. Well, the French ones, I proofed them. Yeah, like I did, you know, and I suggested quite a few changes. When I'm translating in like other languages as well, I just hope they did a good job. Like I've no. So, but yes, yes, I do proof them.
How do the stories change when they get translated back to the original language? How does it change from reading it in English to Italian?
Well, this was quite strange. I was ready, you know, to crucify the
Yes.
translator. I had always horrible experience with translations into language I could actually understand. English came first. I had one book translated into English, which took me 1 year to edit. So it took more time to edit than to write, because the translation was making me mad, and I would throw away the translation I'm very, very angry. So, and when it finished, it was still horrible, so that actually the current edition, which now is it's available here in England, has been edited by Ian, who actually cursed me for a long time, because there was a lot of work to do, but now it's okay. So, going back to that story, it was, I must say that the translation was good. So I was positively surprised. It was a good translation, and slightly embarrassing to say, in certain cases, it was very elegant in a way I would have not been. I don't say that this was better than how I would have said it. Just, you know, some place here and there. Of course, if I had written it, it would have been more mine, and probably I would have made other things better. It was different. So actually, it was there was something of the translator too. For this reason, actually, I was not eligible for the prize for the Italian, like the BSSA award. Well, the Italian one, because it was not my story, but the translation of the story.
Oh God.
Yeah. Well, I found it very entertaining.
One more question then.
Two of my stories are being translated into Italian, oddly enough. But what I wondered is, how do the translator, or you when you're translating, how do you translate idioms or things that are specific to one culture? How do you put those
You
Very,
ideas?
very difficult.
You have to rewrite. It's impossible, actually.
There are various solutions. The guy who translated Watership Down adapted the local dialect, which is spoken for a very small part of the book. And he created this strange dialect, which is made up of several Italian dialects, but it's not any one of them. Because if you just use an Italian dialect, it comes with so many and so precise correlations that you just can't do it. The Simpsons have decided to give the various characters and I would say almost a racial identity, so that the gardener is from Sardinia, the policemen are Sicilians, and so on. And you know, the comic value works, which is why they did it.
What are the mafia guys in The Simpsons?
Sorry?
The mafia guys, the mob guys in The Simpsons, where are they
I
from?
don't know. I presume they would use Sicilian.
In France, we put footnotes sometimes. I don't think I've actually read, in a science fiction book, I haven't seen that. But in thrillers, it's done a lot.
Actually, I had a story in Qatar as well, oddly enough, but there was a footnote in that to explain something that obviously didn't translate very well.
Yeah, it's when it doesn't translate well, it's like, the book is like, I was reading this Swedish book, I think, that had been translated into French, and it was like riddled with footnotes. It got to the
Let me
point where it
use
was
footnotes when I
annoying,
translate
but,
it.
well, actually, what was annoying was the footnotes were all at the end of the book. So like every 3
Yes.
pages, you had to break the narration and go flip at the
Yeah,
back and curse.
that's
the
just a dream
translate.
breaker, right?
Yeah.
Like it's terrible. Yeah.
Terrible.
Well, in my stories that have been translated, there were two different problems with the translations that were insurmountable. The first one was, in English, was a stream of consciousness type of story where it was an inner monologue, and so to convey that, I dropped most of the subject pronouns, which we can do in English easily, and it just conveys a quick thinking. Go out, go to the store, go down the stairs. In French, you cannot do that. There's no way to create that sort of snappy pace. The translator found some sort of solution that to this day I'm not really satisfied with, and there was just no way to convey that sense of urgency with French that it's a language that resists urgency greatly. And the other problem was with the other story is that to convey a sense of strangeness right in the first sentence, I coined a new verb in the first sentence. But it's a verb made from a noun that any English speaker would understand exactly what that verb means. But to immediately unsettle you, I put that word, right? In French, you can't do that. The translator said, well, there's no verb for that. And I told her, well, can't you just make one up? And she said, oh, no.
It should first be discussed in the parliament.
Yes, exactly, And so the story could not open in French with that kind of cognitive dissonance that I injected by coining a new word, and that could not be done. And that's such a science fictional effect that, is not welcome in French. Yeah, right.
All right, thank you. I would like to thank you guys to come in and listen to us Europeans, continental Europeans speak. and continental European language speakers. Continental European language speakers.
You're just a
please give
Now for the free books to eat.
Yeah. If anybody wants an extremely limited edition of the story on the ballot, because there are only 43 in the universe, the ink ran out in Genoa.
One spread story where now genders.
Right.
Just all new.
Right.
And then a French
Yeah.
Okay, fine. And then a French
You will vote for
Of course.
the Lord. Yeah.
No.
Oh yeah, there we are. Only three left in the known
I have
universe.
one story that I'm really hesitant to ever have translated because